Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mini Scoop. This is your little dash of news at the end of the week. We have our Scoop podcast that we begin every Monday with, which sets the table for the week ahead and gets you informed and ready for what we expect for the news week. And then we have our Mini Scoop at the end of the week because we just don't want to leave you with that. We want to give you a little something to think about as you go into the weekend because a lot can happen between Monday and Friday. And so this is our effort in Mini Scoop to just give you that little something extra. So I'm glad that you're here today. We came off the Thanksgiving holiday and suddenly found ourselves in a brand new news cycle. And one of the most interesting things about being a journalist isn't just reporting the stories and being able to entertain any of the curiosities that you might have. That's one of the exciting things about being a journalist. One of the great things about it is that you start seeing patterns to stories, or you start seeing that there are similar themes that you can talk about, even though that you may get a variety of stories that seem totally unconnected, different people, different scenarios, but that they're centered around a universal theme that we can all sort of latch on to. This is something that we can do as journalists on a regular basis. And the way that our news cycle is in America doesn't really allow for that. And that's what I want to do with Smarter News. You take a look at these random stories, and if you take a step back, you think, well, this is what this is all really about. And this week we have an example of that because this week one of the major themes we see in the news is a question about the rule of law, specifically the rule of law in America. What does it mean? How does it protect us or not? Who does it apply to or not? How is it being applied? Is justice actually being done? And justice in America is really important because it's foundational to who we are as a country. Our justice system is very unique. And it's the uniqueness of that justice system that was part of our founding. It was unique that you were going to be innocent until proven guilty. It was unique that you were going to be judged by a group of your peers. It is unique to talk about the law as being applied to everybody equally. And of course, there's constantly that debate about whether or not that's actually the case. But this is unique to the United States. So when we see stories that are pulling on this string about the rule of law in America, it's important for us to take a step back and ask these bigger questions about our justice system, which is so important to who we are as a country and who we are as citizens. We start this week with a story about the president pardoning his son, President Biden pardoning Hunter Biden, and there were all sorts of questions about the uniqueness of this pardon, the breadth of this pardon, and whether or not this reflected the values of America about the law being applied equally to all. That's another question we've been asking, though, over the last several years, hasn't it? Related to cases of President elect Donald Trump. So it's been applied to different political figures from different political parties. And this has been a fundamental question for us in this news period we've been in. And then we had this unexpected story that happened midweek in America's largest city. Another story that really pulls again on questions about the rule of law and the justice system, but so many other facets as well. And that was the murder of a high profile CEO from the healthcare industry. This story is very rich because there's so many different ways that you can report on it. We can report on it simply from the legal side of it, the criminal side of it, the fact that we're looking at a crime and there's an effort to try to solve this crime right now. It's a big national and international story. There's a lot of social questions around this story, a lot of economic questions around this story because of the industry that the CEO represents. But those overarching themes about law and order and whether or not we have it in America are really uh, are really prevalent in the stories that we're seeing in front of us this week. So I'm going to take some time to focus on this murder mystery in Manhattan because it's a story that's so rich and there's many different things that we could highlight. At any moment there could be a break in the case and we find out who the suspect is and we get a little bit more of a piece of the puzzle of why this crime actually happened, when it did and how it did. So I was thinking about how can I provide some information to you as a reporter that is going to be evergreen information that could still make you smarter regardless of how this story develops. And I think I found a couple things just again based on the curiosities around this story. To set the stage though, let me just share with you, this is the very first comments we got from the New York Police Department early on Wednesday. We haven't received any on the record comments since. And we're about 48 hours from this press conference. But if you're just new to the story, you just want a quick recap, this is what we know.
Town Manhattan early this morning, 50-year-old Brian Thompson, the CEO of UnitedHealthcare, was shot and killed in what appears at this early stage of our investigation to be a brazen, targeted attack. This does not appear to be a random act of violence. The victim was in New York City to speak at an investor conference. It appears the suspect was lying in wait for several minutes. And as the victim was walking to the conference hotel, the suspect approached from behind and fired several rounds, striking the victim at least once in the back and at least once in the right calf. Many people passed the suspect, but he appeared to wait for his intended target. The suspect fled, first on foot, then on an e-bike, and was last seen in Central Park on Center Drive early this morning. The victim was removed to Roosevelt Hospital, where he was pronounced. We've been in touch with his family, his friends, and his colleagues, and they are very much in our thoughts and prayers at this hour. The full investigative efforts of the New York City Police Department are well underway, and we will not rest until we identify and apprehend the shooter in this case.
We learned a lot in those comments. A high profile CEO, an annual investor conference, and an industry that doesn't normally make general news. The healthcare industry is not something we talk about specifically related to companies on a general news basis. If I was still in business news, is something that we would focus a lot on. But there was, in that short period of time, in the short press conference that lasted a little bit more than 10 minutes in total, we actually got a lot of information to chase down these leads. And what I want to do is talk to you about the two sort of big pockets of this story. We have the healthcare industry and how that relates to this story. And then we have the crime itself. And so let's just talk a little bit about the healthcare industry. So to understand, why this CEO matters, we have to understand how big the healthcare industry is. The healthcare industry in America is the largest employer next to the federal government. It is massive. It is also one of the largest categories of consumer spending. So when we're looking at what Americans are spending per person, we can look at healthcare being a major source of that. And the private healthcare industry is one that is fairly controversial in America and a lot of different countries around the world. And some of you are watching from different countries. There's lots of different healthcare systems. In America, generally speaking, there's a dissatisfaction with private healthcare, but there is a reluctance to have government more involved in healthcare. So it's an interesting industry in that it's so huge, so massive, such a big part of consumer spending. And when you talk to consumers, even if I talk to family and friends, love to hear your thoughts on this as well. No one really says, "Well, I just love my healthcare. My healthcare is great. I love my insurance company." You don't often hear people speak about it in that way. And let's face it, when it comes to healthcare, some of the most basic needs in our lives, sometimes those needs are not the things that are the most enjoyable. Healthcare can feel like a chore. It also can be addressing a problem that can be massively disruptive to our lives in ways that are catastrophic. So it's a tough topic. It's a big topic. It's a huge industry. One number I saw, and I thought you'd find this it's kind of interesting to keep in mind, is that the per capita spending, so healthcare spending per person in America comes down to just over $13,400 a year. Just under $13,500 is a better way to round it up. So you have to ask yourself, do you feel like you get over $13,000 in healthcare value? If that's what we're all spending on average, a lot of us are spending a lot more, some are spending a lot less. Does it feel like that in the United States? And when we're talking to people anecdotally, when we're talking about the healthcare industry overall, I can speak to this as a reporter, but also as a mother and as a friend. Again, the feeling against the industry is not one that is super positive. And there's a question about how that plays in here. The other part of this story that is important is United Healthcare. So the CEO, Brian Thompson, is the head of United Healthcare. That's the largest private health insurance company in the United States. The United Health Group is a larger umbrella company. And again, a massive company that is impacting tens of millions of Americans every single day. So Brian Thompson is the head of the private health insurance group. The United Healthcare is based in partly in Minnesota. And Minnesota is an interesting state just to think about for a moment because we hear it in the investigation. This person was visiting from Minnesota, his family's in Minnesota, the company's in why what is that all about? Minnesota is actually a hub for healthcare, the healthcare industry. And there's a lot of companies that either have their headquarters or have a big footprint in Minnesota. United Health Group is one of them. The Mayo Clinic is another one, 3M, Medtronics. It's a huge employer as well in the state of Minnesota. And the reason why I'm giving you this sort of context is it's important to understand just how big this industry is. I could throw a bunch of numbers at you, billions, trillions. We all don't even know what that even means, just to understand the influence of these companies, not only on American industry, but the economy overall, is really critical to also understanding this story. One of the underreported parts of this story so far was actually highlighted in the Wall Street Journal. So remember, United Health Group has its headquarters in Minnesota, United Healthcare. And there were a couple protests that happened there at the headquarters over the last year. These aren't huge protests, maybe about 100 people, one in April, one in July. But in these protests, there were at times arrests of people disrupting traffic. So you think about it, it's not a huge group. We're not talking about thousands of people. We're talking about people that are upset enough at the insurance industry that they're showing up to protest, and then some of them are getting arrested. That gives us an idea of the feeling or the passion about how people feel about this industry. So again, just a little context for the economic side of this story. So then let's talk a little bit about the crime. And specifically, the CEO here, a huge industry, an industry and a company that impacts so many Americans. And yet, last week, if I asked you, who is the CEO of America's largest private health insurer, I would have no idea. Would you know the name? Brian Thompson? I wouldn't. And this is a key part of this story. Think about the celebrity culture of CEOs in America, really all over the world, but think about it in America. If I said to you, who's the CEO of Apple? You say Tim Cook. Who's the CEO of Meta? Mark Zuckerberg. Who's the CEO of Tesla? Elon Musk. You would know some names, but the companies, the CEOs of companies that really can impact our life or death, they remain almost anonymous to the American people. I don't know what that really means. I thought that was interesting to think about for a second. Who are the CEOs of the companies that impact your life? And do you know enough about them? And what are their circumstances? One of the things that this story highlights is here's a CEO of a very powerful company in the United States. And yet, for most of us, we could be in a coffee shop with them and have no idea. Completely anonymous. Anonymous to most of us, but certainly to not the suspect. The other part of this crime that's also important to pull out. And I speak to this as someone who lived in New York for 13 years, most of my adult life. I love New York. I'm very familiar with this area where this crime happened. I actually lived just a couple blocks away, worked a couple blocks away from this. If there was one place in the world not to commit this crime, it would be this location because it's just so busy. There is just so much visibility. There's so many people. There is a presence of police officers on a regular basis. The Hilton in Midtown Manhattan is a large hotel. It's not necessarily beautiful. You're not walking by thinking, wow, that's an amazing historic building. It's not that. But the Hilton has an interesting history in New York because it's often used for big events, such as this sort of investor conference or press conferences. It's sort of the central location, very busy. You could have tourists staying there, or you could have, Elvis Presley gave a press conference at the Hilton at one point. One of the most interesting parts of the Hilton's history is the first cell phone call that was made on a phone outside the Hilton in Manhattan. So it's well recognized, not necessarily in the same historic nature as, the Plaza or something like that, but it's huge, it's big, it's, again, hugely visible in Manhattan, very busy. And so for the crime to happen here is also a little bit of a clue into the passion behind this crime, because someone would have to want to make sure that they committed this crime to do it in such a visible manner. There is crime that's committed in the shadows, if someone wants to do something that hurts somebody, but they don't necessarily want the notoriety. And other crimes they do. And in this case, that's one of the questions that I find myself returning to. Did this person intend to do this crime in this way on the sidewalk? Were they going inside the hotel? What was the actual plan here? Because to do it in this way took some strategic thought, and it took some hubris to do so, and then to completely flee and disappear. And that's what happened to this suspect. I want to show you a map here. This gives you an idea of the where the hotel is, and I'm gonna use my cursor to show you where it is. So it's the Hilton Midtown, and the reason why I'm showing you this map, Radio City is just a couple blocks away, Central Park's is a couple blocks away. I wanted to tell you about something I reached out to the police department with a question about the New York Police Department this morning, and the reason why I think this is important. So this is, again, a massive hotel, takes up an entire city block. There's entrances here on 53rd and 54th and on Avenue of the Americas, 6th Street or 6th Avenue, excuse me. And so there's a lot of ways to get in to this hotel. And if you were just like thinking, oh, I'm just going to walk into the hotel, you might walk in the front entrance. The police keep referencing that Brian Thompson was staying somewhere else. He wasn't staying at the Hilton, which is why he walked across the street to this hotel so that he could attend the investor conference. There's a hotel just a couple steps away across the street on 54th. There's also a historic hotel on the corner nearby called the Warwick, and police have not identified the hotel that he was staying at, nor had they confirmed if he was staying at the hotel with anyone. And the reason why I think this is really important and critical to this case is in order to know how to target this person, because there's so many hotels around Midtown, you would really need to know where he was staying, when he was leaving, what he was wearing, especially in the winter. People wear coats. And so it's hard to kind of identify people if they have a coat and a hat on. In this case, the CEO was just wearing a blazer because he was just walking, again, across the street. But for the shooter to be set up in the right way, the shooter needed to have some information. They needed to know where he was coming from, which plays into the premeditation of this crime. And so I asked the New York Police Department if they could share with us where exactly, can they confirm where Brian Thompson was staying? And since there was a warrant issued for the room, what did they find? And was he there alone? Brian Thompson had a wife. He has 2 children, but now we understand that the wife was living in a separate home with the kids. And so there's, a little bit of a question about the dynamics of that relationship, and maybe not being traditional in the same household, where they separated, what was going on there. So was he with anyone else? And what sort of surveillance was taking place of him? Or did the shooter just get lucky? The investor conference was happening. The shooter was going to be there anyways. And this just happened to be in the right place at the right time, waiting at the right entrance. But because of how big the hotel is, because of the multitude of different entrances, I think that's part of the story that hasn't been really talked about. Right now, police are focused on DNA evidence. There's a report that some DNA evidence has been found in the hostel where the shooter apparently stayed for several days before this crime. And there's all sorts of questions about why. Why was the CEO targeted? Early reporting, according to law enforcement sources, say that there were certain terms that were written on the bullet casings, terms like deny, for example, or delay. These are terms often associated with a tactic well known to insurance companies to try to delay or deny your insurance claims. And that's one of the big critiques of insurance companies, is that we pay money for insurance, but then when it comes to getting the coverage that we need, the coverage isn't there, just generally speaking. And so this strategy, again, well documented, well talked about for years. Was this a crime of retribution where someone felt that this company wasn't providing the healthcare, or this CEO wasn't doing his job, and therefore he was targeted? We're taking several leaps there. And here's where I want to end this sort of analysis with you, is that the police department was very forthcoming with information right away. They had to. There was too much coming out. It was the CEO of a major company. It was a strange circumstance. A murder doesn't just happen in the middle of Manhattan. I know we have views of New York City, if we think back several decades of this rampant crime, but this sort of a murder in the middle of Manhattan at this particular time doesn't happen. And in fact, it doesn't happen a lot of places in America. Luckily, sure, we have street crime, but this sort of targeted, what some are describing as an assassination, isn't something that is common. So the uniqueness of this crime also forced the police department to come out. They gave us quite a bit of information because they needed the public's help. They wanted someone to identify this person, and the person was on the loose in New York City. So if they didn't come out and further crimes were committed, this would be even more of certainly a bigger story and more of an issue for the police department. So they come out right away with a lot of information. But then over the last 48 hours, this has all been law enforcement sources. Law enforcement officials say, and they're talking to the local press in New York, which has a big microphone, even nationally, because it's America's largest city. A lot of national press is getting this information, but they're not on the record. And sometimes this can happen when they're getting closer, that they're actually chasing down leads. So they don't want to be on the record. They want to sort of plant this information because they're also trying to counter what the suspect may do. But I'm really waiting to see, do they step to the microphones again and give us more information on the record? Or is this a stage of the investigation where either they have a strong lead that they're trying to chase down, or perhaps they still have nothing, in which case that it becomes even more of a mystery. So wrapping this back up into the rule of law and law and order and thinking about the themes, I go back to how unique this crime was and the targeted nature of it and the targeted nature of a major CEO, someone who's wealthy, someone that could be thought of as in the elite class. This sort of murder is not common. And one of the reasons it's not common is because we have the rule of law in America, because this idea of vigilantism isn't something that Americans embrace. And some of the reaction online has been, you can see the expression of frustration and hate of the healthcare industry and the feeling, a little bit of this rawness, the wildness of the responses of applauding vigilantism. And I want to pay close attention to that because social media can give us a different perspective than what's actually true. So I I add that asterisk because you can't just go based off of social media reaction, but we can also still pay attention to it. And so the rule of law is important here. Law and order is important here in this particular case. In America, we expect that people are not just assassinated on the streets. That's something that we can see in other countries, but we don't see here very often. We believe that if you commit a crime, you will be held responsible. You get your day in court, but you will be held responsible. And that the rule of law works. The rule of law works. But if there's continuing questions about the rule of law and how it's applied and who is held responsible and who is not, then I wonder what's on the other side of that. And it's one of the questions that I'm asking today because we've had so many stories, not just over the last several days, not just over the last week, but over the last several years about whether or not the rule of law is working for Americans. And what does that mean? What does that mean to us as we go into 2025? So, just a couple kind of deep thoughts to think about. Again, you could apply that to a lot of stories we covered from the overturn of Roe v. Wade to the prosecution of the president elect and beyond. And now we have these two stories, the pardoning of the president's son, but now this kind of flagrant, violent killing of a high profile CEO in America to ask, is the justice system working? And will it work? Will it work here? So I'll keep you posted on these stories. I'll let you know if I hear anything from the New York Police Department. Let me do a quick check. You never know. And if we could do this live with each other, you never know when you might get a response. And oftentimes when I write in or call in, I think, oh, I'm never going to hear back. And then you get surprised. So I haven't gotten a response yet, but I'll keep you posted on social media and beyond if I do. If you'd like more updates to these stories, you can always see them at smarternews.com. But again, quick, concise, nonpartisan news and a deeper breath for a broader perspective of what are the major themes in news that we're experiencing together so we could be a little bit more thoughtful and perhaps a little bit less reactionary to some of the headlines. I appreciate going through this with you together. Thank you for indulging me as we look through a couple of the different parts of these stories, and I'll keep you posted as we hear more. Have a great weekend, guys. I'll see you back on Monday with Scoop. Bye. Thank you for believing in quick, concise, nonpartisan, smarter news. Every time you join us or share or save our content, you help us build a solution in news, and we are so grateful. We have a few other ways you can support our mission, from joining our insider community Scoop, to shopping our gear at our Smarter shop, to just telling a friend. The best way to do any of this is to visit smarternews.com or follow us at Smarter News on social media. Don't worry, we put all of this in the captions so it's easy for you. Plus, we added our email just in case you want to drop us a note. We always love hearing from you. Thank you for helping us deliver news smarter.